Dutch people, from my experience, their culture is reserved and it is orderly and it is very like efficient and all those things that you hear about, but there is certainly a quirky aspect to their culture as well that is fun and is super charming.
So could you see yourself living in the Netherlands again? Would you like to go back?
When it comes to like looking at somewhere that I could see myself long term, it would be a dream country to end up in. Obviously in the Netherlands they have a lot more bikes than in Canada. I felt like a true Dutch person once I had a bike in the Netherlands.
What was your experience like when you went back to Canada? Did you have any like reverse culture shock?
Oof, definitely a few. I would say
So where are you from originally in Canada?
so. Originally, I was born in Ottawa, Canada, which is the capital city in Ontario. And I grew up here in the west end of the city, sort of like deep in the suburbs. And my family is still here. I'm actually back here visiting in Ottawa at the moment. So that's where I'm at. But I grew up here. I went to high school here and I moved to Toronto for university. And growing up, I always definitely was fascinated with big cities and like was looking forward to move to Toronto one day, was looking forward to like explore more places. And yeah, moved to Toronto for university and I studied theater and acting there and met like amazing people in a community there. And it was actually after school there, my last course, part of it was doing a show in the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh in Scotland. So what a way to end university. Some of my close friends and I from the program, we did this course, which went into the summer and finished with us like performing at the Fringe in Scotland. And it sort of started the snowball of like, we're over there in the UK, we finished university, we should do the classic backpacking trip. And we sort of like planned from there to travel around a little bit. And it was amazing. We did like a 3 to 4 month backpacking trip with a group of friends and went around sort of like the main attractions of Western Europe through like France and the Netherlands and London, some of the UK. And that definitely like ignited the travel bug in me for sure. And that eventually led to me living abroad in the Netherlands as well. So that was sort of like a story of how I moved out of Canada. But yeah.
So was that like your first big international trip that you went on?
It was the first at that like length and scale. In high school, I was in French immersion all through school, just because Ottawa is a super bilingual city, being right on the border of Quebec. And in, I think it was grade 11 or grade 12. Oh my gosh, I should remember. Grade 12, we did a trip to France as part of like a French course. And I did that in high school. That was awesome. And that also was really the first experience I had where like going somewhere and knowing the language opened up that place even more. And that was my first time in Europe. So that was sort of the first big experience, but that was like a 2 to 3 week trip sort of thing. The backpacking trip at the end of university was like more of a big scale. We went to multiple countries and it was for sort of 4 months. So it was a more of a planning process.
What was your experience like going through French immersion in Canada, like a French immersion school? Like I've heard kind of mixed reviews from people. Some people say that like the French immersion program is really good and it prepares you for like a bilingual life in Canada. Other people say that it kind of lacks in one way or another. And by the time you finish it, you may or may not be proficient in the language. What was your experience like?
That's super interesting. I think it is an interesting thing in Canada because both English and French are national languages, but there's very specific like areas in Canada where French is more widely spoken and then where it is but fully bilingual. And I think Ottawa, because we're right on the border, it is, but also because we have all the government buildings and all that stuff here. So to answer your question, in Ottawa, it actually was quite an immersive experience because a lot of the schools here offer a fully French program or a French immersion program, as well as like an English program. So a lot of peers were going through it as well, which allowed things to be like a little bit more immersive, which I think is so important when you're learning a language. The class sizes definitely got smaller and smaller as the year went on, meaning like the people who actually finished French immersion all the way through till the end of high school got smaller, but there still was a tight group who did it. And we finished high school by doing a DELF certification testing, which is like an internationally recognized language test. And so you theoretically can leave high school recognized and certified bilingual. I certainly feel like I am, and I've been able to communicate and study and explore and whatnot in French just as much as I need to, which is awesome. But there is like, I'm sure, a mixed bag just based on like, one, I'm someone who loves languages, and that was one of my favorite classes. So getting to do school trips and getting to do all these things surrounding like learning the language was so amazing. And I certainly took full advantage of that. But I also think it would depend definitely where you are located in Canada. If you are somewhere like Alberta growing up, one of my closest best friends is from Calgary originally as well. And I have a couple other friends who grew up in Alberta. And they really said like there was hardly any schools around them offering French immersion, much less than experiences to go see like plays in French and experiences to go any sort of event and like cultural experience or language experience in French. I got involved in workshops and things like that, which like totally helps you to become more immersed and fluent. As you know, I'm sure, as someone who knows a lot of languages. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that has to do with the size of the country as well, right? And I think that's an important point. The context that you're using the language, or the context where you're learning it, really does matter. Because internationally, that's something that other countries know about Canada, is that we speak French. And so being someone that's also interested in languages, I get that question all the time, like, oh, you like languages, so you must speak French, right? Being Canadian. And I hear, like, growing up in Western Canada, it felt like we couldn't be farther removed from French culture and French language. And so for me, I was like, I had way more opportunities to learn Tagalog, for example, the first foreign language that I learned, than I ever had with French. Like I didn't hear French at all, but Filipino people were all around me, So yeah, it's a big country, and that does change it, because you need people to speak with to like really, get a good level in a language. And so maybe kids that do like French immersion in Alberta have it at school, but then outside of that, there's no application or something like that. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure there are people in Alberta that have great experiences with it as well. So
no, I think you're making a great point. Like it is definitely an added challenge. In my life, I've even been fortunate that my mom is a teacher and at one point was a French teacher. So I do have that like surrounding me. My stepmother can speak French from her like native language. So it's surrounding me in my life in many ways, not even just the fact that I'm in Ottawa, which is somewhere where it is more too. So I think that is a very good point. And I think it is still a very beautiful thing about Canada that you could be somewhere and your next language could be Tagalog. That is a really cool thing. I wish that, and I hope that we, continue to get to a point where like more people across Canada can speak French, just because I think it's such a cool opportunity for everyone to be like learning a second language more seriously from a young age. But it is a really beautiful thing that there's enough Filipino people where you were, or enough any type of person were in Canada that people could pick that up as well. I think that is really cool.
Yeah. It all depends on like who you're with, I guess. I mean, Canada is also seen as a bilingual country, but most people are not bilingual, right? Most people speak either French or either English. And so if you can speak both of those, I mean, that's a real advantage. Anyway, you'd be in the minority, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it would definitely be a minority. Again, it's like I have a skewed perspective in Ottawa because so many people work for the government specifically here, and that is required. So it's almost like an Ottawa culture specific thing, I would say, the fact that the bilingual stuff here. But it certainly is an advantage. And I think like all of my experiences traveling and living abroad, I have totally taken away from many different places the advantage and the privilege of being an English speaker natively, especially in the Western world, but just like in so many places, tourism leans toward that and media leans toward that and stuff. And then French, although it's not the most widely spoken language, opens up doors to so many more places, and including places in Canada, like you said, where there's people who only speak French. So it even is opening doors like within your own country, which is, I think, a perspective that like if you haven't lived in Canada, you might not realize, because it is just bilingual country, like you said. Yeah.
So like one of the first trips you went on was to France then? Is that what you said?
Yeah. That was sort of the first experience I had going to Europe, going abroad. We were in France, in Paris specifically, but also traveling a little around France and around the Loire Valley. And it was specifically sort of around French like a French curriculum through school, but we got to go and experience it all and like have croissants in Paris and do the whole thing, go to chateaus and stuff. So it was really, yeah, like a classic school trip, but it was awesome.
Would you say that you were always kind of an internationally minded person that had an interest in going abroad, or was that something that you developed over time?
I think it is something that was always in me. Even just from like, if you want to look at it from like a metaphorical place, like I always loved adventure books and fantasy books growing up. And I think there is like an adventurous like spirit in that and just like wanting to explore that. That trip in high school definitely was an experience that opened my mind to the fact that I always liked languages in school and I was always very good at languages in school. But that was a real life experience where I could speak with people in France and I felt fully bilingual there. And it really something clicked that I just like got a new passion for speaking French and learning more languages in the future, hopefully, and just trying to soak that in as part of traveling. So there was definitely a turning point with that.
So would you say that like your travel was at least partially linguistically motivated then, where you wanted to learn other languages while you were traveling?
I think in part it wasn't necessarily like the purpose or the motivation, although I do have a bucket list idea of going somewhere where I could go for 3 weeks and learn Spanish specifically, because I was in Mexico earlier this year for about a month and just like loved soaking up as much Spanish as possible. So I would love to go on a trip and really focus on that. More so it's just been something that I've really taken from all my travels. And taken from the times I've lived abroad. I have like worked abroad in a couple different countries, and in the places where English isn't the native language, that's obviously like a challenge, but it's so fulfilling and it's such a good way to like just pick things up quickly. Even if it is, I was serving tables in the Netherlands, so I like to tell people I can speak customer service Dutch and sort of like serve a table enough that I could ask questions and get the answers. But if we go off that script, off the customer service script, I don't know how fluent I'm going to be able to keep up with everything. But it was a really good way to immerse myself for sure.
I mean, like you said, we are so privileged as English speakers in that we can just speak our native language in almost any country. And like people will like adjust for us, and there's signs in English all over the world. And there's a temptation for English speakers to not learn other languages. And that's why we have the reputation of people that don't. Right? We like, by and large, native English speakers are the people that don't tend to learn other languages. And like from the English speaking perspective, it does make sense given like the environments that we're in. Like it's not fair, but it is what it is that the world is set up kind of to like universally allow English speakers to navigate. And so if you want to learn another language as an English speaker, it almost takes like a little bit of extra motivation because it's not going to happen on its own. You know, in a lot of places, people will just be like, yeah, whatever, I speak English. You don't have to learn Spanish. You don't have to learn French. And so you have to kind of take it like onto yourself basically and be like, okay, I want to do this. I'm going to do this for me. I'm going to like have some intrinsic motivation to learn this language. But it is too bad because like you said, it's like one of the most rewarding things you can do. Like if you went to England and were and you were a waiter there or a server, it would be much, much easier. But like doing it in the Netherlands, it feels like that would be very enriching and rewarding on like a personal level. Like you accomplished something, like you were doing this job in a different language, you know?
Totally. It is definitely an added challenge. Having to do it a little bit opened my mind so much more than I could ever imagine to the people who come to Canada, for example, and are coming like without English and stuff like that. It just like gave me so much more empathy than was already there to people who are coming and doing English in their second language, whether it's school or work or anything like that. And to what you said as well, about being somewhere and people switching into English, it is like such a double-edged sword. And obviously it's wonderful that people are trying to accommodate to you, but I definitely had that experience in the Netherlands as well. They speak extremely good English there and extremely well in English, I should say, as I should use proper English grammar saying this. They speak very well in English, and even they, I would say in general, from the Dutch people that I've met and talked to, have an opinion like, oh, I don't want to speak in English because I'm not strong and I it's going to be clear I don't speak English well. But across the board, they speak English very well. So in the times I've tried to really commit to speaking Dutch with someone, they'll automatically switch back into English. Especially, I lived in Amsterdam, so somewhere like that where tourism is everywhere. The Dutch people who do live there are very used to just like automatically switching into English. But it does make it more of a challenge to learn the language. If I was to go back to the Netherlands and live there again, I know I would want to go somewhere much more off the tourist track in order to like fully immerse myself more in the language. When I moved there the first time, that was the reason I moved to Amsterdam, because I couldn't speak Dutch. So in order to work, I knew there would be more opportunity there. But there still was like a little bit of opportunity speaking with people there. I did actually find working in Amsterdam, I spoke a lot of French, to bring it back to that, just because there's a lot of French tourists and a lot of French travelers coming through. And like you pick up everything. There's German people and people from all over the world coming to travel in Amsterdam, which is like a cool part of that city too. So yeah, that was a specific part about there.
So like to zoom out a little bit to give some context here. I mean, you traveled to a lot of countries, like over 30, right? Something like that?
Totally. So at this point, after this past year, I've hit 34, which is crazy to say, really exciting. And 34 countries. Yeah, my best friend and I last year did a year-long backpacking trip where our goal was to hit 30 countries before each of us turned 30. And for me, that was January in 2025, for her in March. And we did it. So we did that. And I've still been putting out all of the videos that are filmed from that year, which was incredible. And I before doing that year-long backpacking trip, lived abroad in the Netherlands. I did a working holiday visa there. So that's my continuous reference back to the Netherlands and Amsterdam. And while I was there, I worked as a server in a pancake house, which is very Dutch, across from the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam. So a very touristic Dutch Amsterdam experience. And yeah, lived there for just over a year in the Netherlands, and was also able to travel around a little bit in France and in the Netherlands there. And I was also an au pair in England for the following year after that. So at that point, I lived just outside of London with a family and traveled a bunch around the UK. And again, a little bit around Europe as well with them. And then that led to the pandemic, sadly, where I was back in Canada. And then after that, a really exciting, amazing year of traveling and backpacking.
So out of the 34 countries that you've traveled to, I mean, was it 34 only in that year, or does that include the Netherlands and the countries in the UK?
It includes everything up to that point, 34 total. So I think in the year we hit about 16 countries, I think, through the year of backpacking. We were accumulating everything we had done so far. So yeah, my best friend who I did the whole trip with and I, both of us had lived abroad, and we enjoy that experience of really getting to be somewhere a little bit longer too. So part of the year was that we could spend a little bit longer in places and stuff. So 16 was a good amount that we could spend, like a month in some countries and stuff like that. But we definitely still were moving. We were in Eastern Europe and in Southeast Asia. So we were moving through a lot of different places, which kept it really interesting.
And so out of those countries, is the Netherlands where you spent the most time abroad?
If I had to put everything accumulative, yes. I was there for over a year between traveling there and then going back and doing the whole process of like moving there and staying there. Yeah. The other places I would have been more traveling through or staying for an extended period of time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you did that before the year-long backpacking trip. You did the Netherlands before that. And so
Exactly.
You had visited before you decided to move there, or did you just jump in?
So a little bit of both. When I did the trip after university with friends, we finished in Scotland. We traveled a little bit through the UK and started in the Netherlands. And we were only in Amsterdam for 4 days, and just stayed in Amsterdam specifically. Obviously, absolutely loved it. And we continued on our trip, went down through France. And my best friend and I broke off from our other group of friends at one point to go to a couple places in Italy. And it was somewhere in Italy, in Perugia, that we were having a couple drinks one night on a patio, just to set the scene. And she pulls up this idea. Her name's Mackenzie, for everyone who doesn't know. Mackenzie pulls up this idea that I've been talking to my dad, and I think we should try to move to Europe, which was really shocking to me at the time and like a total curveball. So that night I was shocked and had a little breakdown, But we talked about it, and very quickly, I'm talking the next day, FOMO got the best of me, and I was like so on board with this idea. She had just heard from her dad about working holiday visas and what that means and like what opportunities there are for Canadians with those. And we very quickly, like both of us, thought of Amsterdam and thought of the Netherlands, even though we had been there so briefly. We just loved it, and something felt right. And kind of like I touched on before, the fact that somewhere like Amsterdam is a foreign country, but English is still completely spoken, and being able to get a job as an English speaker would be a possibility, period. That definitely was like a door that was open there. So we continued on our backpacking trip and finished all the way down in Greece. But then after that started the process. I came back to Canada for about 4 to 5 months just to like save up and continue the whole visa process, and then moved back to the Netherlands after that. And then I was there for a little over a year.
Were you tempted to go to any of the other countries that you guys were backpacking through instead of the Netherlands? Like, was there like a pros and cons list?
That's a good question. There totally was. I think for me personally, France was on the list because I can speak French, and that would have been a really cool experience. I knew I would have liked that. And it's still a possibility for me in the future. I would love to live in France one day, manifesting that. But it wouldn't have worked necessarily to go with my friend Mackenzie at the time because she speaks only in English. And I was very set on doing this experience with her at this point. So out of those two places, which were probably the biggest contenders in my eyes, the Netherlands just like felt the most right. I feel like in our fantasies, maybe we would have loved to go to Greece as well, because we rented scooters and we lived our Mamma Mia fantasies in Greece. But I think it wasn't exactly where we wanted to like go and find a bit more of a community and stuff necessarily. So we settled on the Netherlands after that.
I mean, talking about community, in the Netherlands, it's a pretty international place, right? Especially in Amsterdam, I would imagine. I mean, that's one of the
Definitely.
most visited tourist spots in all of Europe. So living there, what is the vibe like? Like, can you still access like authentic kind of Dutch culture, or is it a lot of like kind of backpackers and more international people?
I think you've hit it exactly. It's a super visited city. So a lot of Dutch people specifically will joke like, oh, Amsterdam, that's not the Netherlands, that's Amsterdam. It has a totally different feel than a lot of the rest of the country does. I've even heard, not so nice maybe, but then compare it to the Vegas of Europe and stuff like that, because it is a type of a city where people go for long weekend trips and things like that. So it definitely has that vibe. It's a huge international touristic city. As someone who really likes travel and was just like open to all those experiences, that was such a highlight for me, because working somewhere, for example, I worked with a couple Dutch people, but also worked with Portuguese people and someone from Singapore and someone from Spain. And that was such a cool community for me to build, especially at that point in my life. If you are looking for that quote unquote authentic Dutch experience, I would say you have to travel outside of Amsterdam to get it. Just because, and not even that far, there are cities like Haarlem that are just like 30, 40 minutes outside of Amsterdam, but are just removed from that international city feel. Amsterdam is like the place in the Netherlands that has the airport, and it is the most popular place. So yeah, you definitely need to leave to get more of that. And some of the culture and customs that were quintessentially Dutch, I found did come through some of the experiences I had, like working and like those workplace customs, renting, and having to go through all that sort of like back end admin stuff. That definitely was a new experience for me, because even being in Amsterdam, an international city, that still was the whole Dutch process of doing things, and I had to figure that out. But when it came to building a community and meeting people, I would say that was very reflective of the fact that Amsterdam's so international. I had friends from like all over, and that was definitely the vibe of the city in general.
And that's a cool vibe as well. I mean, I'm not bashing that at all. I mean, we have that here in Canada, and I love it, especially here in Vancouver. Yeah, just having the opportunity to interact with different people from different countries and learn different languages, if you're into that as well, in one place is a real blessing for sure. Yeah, traveling to a place and moving to a place. I mean, those are pretty different things, right? Like one is like, you know, kind of honeymoon, and then the other one, it can become real life really quick. How did those two compare? Visiting Amsterdam, let's say the first time, and then actually living there for like a year.
Oh, the honeymoon is a good example. The honeymoon, or it's like dating for the first time. Like you see the city or the place, you see it for what it is. You get a first impression of it, but you definitely do not get all the ins and outs, and it's totally a different experience. I think that to put it simply, it is just those day-to-day ins and outs of life that you don't, when you go visit somewhere, when you go travel somewhere, you are on vacation and you're like leaving that like regular life behind. So you don't have to worry about those things. But when you do live somewhere, there's a lot of things that you don't think about that come up. Everything from just like setting up a phone plan to setting up your bank account, and it being a whole new system. If you're moving to a whole new country, things can be totally different. In the Netherlands, when you rented a place, you had to register your address, and there was quite an intense process about the amount of people who can be registered per address, and you have to be very specific about registering when you're renting a place, sort of thing. So there just is like a lot of ins and outs that you have to figure out, much more than you would if you were visiting somewhere. But on the other hand, that's like the double-edged sword of the living abroad experience, is that you are there long enough to see things that are more subtle change and like see the seasons change. And you're there long enough to pick up things like the language more, to just pick up on cultural customs more. And those just like come from time being there sometimes, because you'll be there over holidays. And like in the Netherlands specifically, I didn't know all the details of big holidays like King's Day until I was just there for the whole year and experienced them. And that gave me such insight into Dutch culture in general because of how they celebrated, or things like that.
Similarly to Las Vegas, you said that sometimes there are some comparisons between Amsterdam and Las Vegas, kind of a weekend getaway place. I feel like for international travelers, it's not typically a place that people spend a lot of time, right? They just stop by and, you know, go to like a cafe or something or whatever it might be, go out, have like, you know, a bachelor party or something. And so being there for a year, you were probably in the minority, right? There was probably a constant revolving door of backpackers, and then you were there the whole time.
Yeah, it is. I forget the exact number, but I knew this when I lived there, that the population expands on the weekend is multiple times the population that is there during the week, because it is so popular for people from the UK specifically, and it's easy for them to come over for the weekend. So it totally has that party feel and that like party reputation on the weekends. I think it was 3 or 4 times the population amount on the weekend specifically. So there's a lot of people, and the city itself, like, I think that's why Dutch people have that opinion of it, because like tourism has really positive effects, but it also has negative effects. And if you were a Dutch person wanting to live in it, you'd really have to want to live in a city that has that like international feel to be there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like, it's international in a different way, right? It's not, I mean, you tell me, I guess, is it international in terms of the people that live there, or is it only international in terms of tourism?
In my experience and observation, today's day and age comes more from tourism. There is a certain feeling, because the Netherlands in general has some really historical ports and stuff like that in other places. There is this feeling in the country in general that it's a place where people pass through and travel through, but exactly to what you're saying, not necessarily a place where people stay for a super long time, but has this feeling of a place that people are passing through. Even its location in Europe is so central. So if you're backpacking or traveling around Europe, chances are you're going to pass through the Netherlands at some point. Whether you stay there for a long time or just pass through. So I think it probably comes more from that tourism place.
Mm-hmm. Which is a little bit different. Like, if you live in a diverse place in terms of the population, there's a certain amount of buy-in, right? Like, everyone lives here and we have that in common. But if you have people just coming through for the weekends, it could be a different vibe, especially if they're coming to like party. As a local, you might see that as kind of like, we just have a bunch of drunk British guys here every Saturday night, not necessarily a cultural exchange. I
mean, a cultural exchange in a way, I guess, if you could look at it like that, but not necessarily one that everyone wants to have all the time, for sure. But I see what you're saying. I think like my experiences that I'm pulling that were so positive come from other people that were there on working holiday visas too and working there. So in like similar situations to me. But I see what you're saying. We were all sort of in that similar boat, and that's what we connected on. Someone who is like a Dutch person who grew up in the Netherlands and then moved to Amsterdam is not going to see that necessarily as a charming thing. Although I did meet Dutch people who were choosing to live in Amsterdam for kind of these reasons that I'm saying. They liked that connection and that international feel, even if it just comes from the fact that like there is more people who are working abroad there and stuff like that.
Like smaller countries do seem to lean more international because outside of their borders, there isn't too many countries that speak Dutch, for example, right? And so it's like they almost have to look outward to a certain degree. You know, a very small country. So, I mean, I'm sure there is tons to do in the Netherlands, but if they ever wanted to travel out, you know, they got to learn English. And it's the same with like the Nordic countries. It's like, okay, if you're a Swedish native speaker, that's awesome if you're in Sweden. As soon as you step outside the border, suddenly it gets a little bit harder to communicate with people. So almost out of necessity, they have to learn English. And then, you know, maybe, they also seem like well-traveled people. It was that the vibe in the Netherlands as well, that like, apart from just Amsterdam itself, Dutch people are pretty international?
I would definitely agree with what you're saying. I think that it's interesting to think of it coming from the fact that the country is small, and maybe that is true. I think it's like, after traveling for this past year, almost a joke in the backpacker community that there are certain countries, if you go to a hostel, you'll find people from that country no matter what. And the Netherlands, weirdly, is one of those countries. There seems to always be Dutch people around in hostels and backpacker type settings. And I think I think that traveling and backpacking is more like common in their culture. Whether that's from like their location, that they're more central in Europe. So being able to work and study anywhere in the EU is like super common, and lots of people growing up even start to do that at an early age. And also the fact that their country is small, so they can only explore so much before going outward. I think that's an interesting point. Everyone that I talk to, even if they didn't grow up in a super touristic area like Amsterdam, they learned English from a super young age. That was very in their school curriculum and very common. So I think that also, the fact that almost everyone in the Netherlands could have enough English to get through a conversation, like, does open up that door, like you said, to feel more comfortable to go abroad and to feel more just like ready. That I can only imagine is like the biggest hurdle in some cases. If you are someone who only speaks one language and you know that no one is going to speak French or Tagalog or any language where you go, I can only imagine that would be like scary and would just be a huge deterrent from wanting to go. So I think the fact that English and Dutch are like a given in their school curriculum, most people that I met would also then speak French and or German and or other languages. So I think language right there, like that focus on it, does open up that part of their culture too. It's just more common for people to go, more common for people and for families to travel, and that ripples in their culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's probably something that happens all over Europe as well. I mean, the proximity to other countries makes that a little bit easier. Like here in North America, it's like we can go to the States, and then that's kind of it.
That's it.
Yeah. In terms of like a road trip, I mean, something close by.
I would always tell sorry to cut you off. I would always tell my European friends, you don't know how lucky you have it being able to work so easily. And just like, oh, next month they're going to go work in Spain. Okay. I wish. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You'll talk to like, German people, and it's like, oh, did you like go on international trips? And they're like, I mean, we went camping in France, but that doesn't count. And I'm like, that's a different country though, isn't it? Like they speak a different language. That's cool. I think they do kind of take it for granted sometimes. So they're like, whatever. I mean, Croatia doesn't count as international travel.
Oh, and they don't understand how good they have it when they can just drive to these places. Like driving in Canada, you're driving for multiple days. You're still in the same province, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Driving in the Netherlands, this is a true story. One time when our friend Catherine came to visit us, we picked up her from the airport and just didn't tell her anything, said we're going to drive home. kept driving and were far into Belgium before she said, "Oh my gosh, your house is really far from the airport. Where are we going?" And we said, "Surprise, we're going on a trip to France this weekend." That was a whole surprise we had planned. But we were well into another country before she even was like, "So, the airport's really far." Because even in Canada, it would be an hour from an airport to get there. So I reminded any European friends I had a lot that they had that good. Yeah.
I mean, with the EU, they don't have official border crossings really, right? So you also don't know when you're passing into another country other than the language, I guess. They kind of make it seamless where you just go from one to another.
Definitely. It was interesting passing between more countries like on land this past year, because sometimes there is like a shift even just in geography or like building style even. That was really interesting to see in Eastern Europe. Through some of those countries, you could really see the influence of like architecture shift. Even in like a random little small town, you could just see where those things, where those like architecture styles had trickled down. But overall, you have no idea. And it happened so quick. Compared to Canada, I haven't even driven across the entirety of Canada, but when I drove across part of it, it was like days of driving and you're still in the same province. So it's a different experience for sure.
I've been to the Netherlands, I think twice, but they were like super low key trips, like an afternoon,
Fun.
Essentially. So I was in Germany. Germany is basically what I would say is the only European country I really have been to, because I was there for a month. I did an exchange through my university. And as a part of the program, they had someone in the school that was like in charge of the international students, and he would like take us out on these field trips kind of. And we went to the Netherlands, to some like close by. I can't remember the city name, but it was like a bus drive away. We were already in kind of like more northwestern Germany, so it was close enough. And we just drove over there for a day, walked around the city, and then went home in the evening. And so I had that experience, but I was there to learn German. And so when we went there, even though it was a border town, I was kind of like, well, it's so close to Germany, I can probably just speak German, right? And so that's what I went in thinking. And then the guy that was kind of leading us around, our tour guide, if you will, was like, "Oh, there's a kind of a bad history vibe in this region with Germany. So like they don't really love Germans and they don't really love speaking German." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I don't like speak Dutch, and I guess I could speak English, but like I'm on this international trip to learn another language. It feels like giving up just to use English." So then we like went to this place, in the Netherlands where they have those little shops where like there's all those tiny little drawers and they have like fried food in them. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, do I know? Yes. Those are quintessential Dutch. So good. It's like takeout food, like burgers and like cheese sandwiches and stuff. But you can just put your money in, take them out of the wall. I know.
Yeah, it's like, I've never seen that before or since, but I was like, this is cool. So I went in there and I was going to go pay, and I was like, what language do I speak? What language? I was like freaking out. And I think I did like some hybrid of like German and English, and it was like awkward. And I just didn't enjoy that. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. But I did feel like, talking about the vibe when you cross the border, when we went there, people did act much differently than German people did. I was surprised. I was kind of being in Germany for a little while. I was kind of getting used to people being like a little bit kind of standoffish with people they don't know. I mean, it's like super low key, reserved kind of attitudes. And then I went to the Netherlands and people were like, "Hey," and I was like, "Are you talking to me?" Like, what do you mean? Hey, like, I didn't.
Taken aback.
Yeah, I was like, "Who are you talking?" Like, people were like smiling at me and stuff on the street, and I was like, "This is unusual." And so I just kind of assumed that Dutch people and German people like shared that kind of like cultural reservation, if you will. But they seemed a little bit more friendly. I don't know. Like, what was your experience with Dutch people living there for so long?
No, I think that's so funny because I can picture that between the Dutch people and the German people that I've met. I can picture this encounter all happening. I feel like I almost understand and understood talking to Dutch people about this, because they would say internationally, lots of people would feel that way. We're very similar to German. Even the Dutch language is similar to German. It's a little bit softer, but it's similar. And it really did remind me sometimes of the way people think that Canadians are exactly like Americans. And there is a certain level of crossover because of proximity and culture and all that. And to make the comparison, like German and Dutch, there are some words that have a bit of crossover and stuff. You totally could like make these comparisons and see that. But then there are definitely differences as well, and different cultural norms. And even though they seem like both of them maybe seem more similar together to a North American person, if you are a Dutch person, it feels totally different from their perspective. I would say in general that I always like was taken aback at first by the Dutch directness and the Dutch bluntness. And that's like the classic thing I feel you hear about Dutch people, is that they're very direct and very blunt. So I suppose if a German is known to be more reserved, maybe a Dutch person is known to be a little bit more direct and blunt, which is kind of similar because they're like reserving their emotions. They're just speaking very directly and they're cutting to the point. But like that would come across so different to a North American person, definitely. So I think like as you're somewhere longer, or as you just like meet more people from a culture, you would pick up on more of those nuances. And Dutch people, from my experience, their culture is reserved and it is orderly and it is very like efficient and all those things that you hear about. But there is certainly a quirky aspect to their culture as well that is fun and is super charming. And hearing about a Dutch person just saying, "Hey, hoi hoi," that sounds exactly like a Dutch person would do that as they were biking by, like saying hoi. So they are like quirky and not afraid to like show their interests in things as well, I found in my experience. So I'm sure that like comes from that place too. But that's funny.
In comparison to Canadians, what are some other like cultural differences with Dutch people?
I think that the bluntness and the directness is a big one, just because it like informs a lot of how we act around people and our way, and how Dutch people would act in society too. Because to compare that in Canada, Canadians are like known to be super friendly and known to be super approachable and chatty and talkative, which I think is very true and comes from a place where like to a Canadian, that's the highest thing that we want to be, is nice and show care towards each other and be friendly and accommodating and aware of everyone. And in the Netherlands, they are trying to be aware of each other and be accommodating and be kind to people around them. The way that they do that is just so different. They will just not beat around the bush and they'll be blunt about something and tell you how they truly feel, or tell you that your hair looks weird or something. Like a stranger on the bus in the Netherlands would say, "Oh my gosh, your hair is looking really weird from the back." And leave it at that, which is so shocking to someone from Canada, or was at least to me when I first moved there. And it just took me a minute to like readjust my brain to the fact that to them, that's exactly like the kindness they'd want to be shown in Canada. In Canada, we just would ignore that and try to redirect the conversation and not make them feel awkward about that. And I think a Dutch person would think like not pointing that out would be rude. So it just totally depends on how you look at things. The fact that the country is so much smaller does like change things culturally too, because I kind of touched on this before. When you're driving across Canada, it can be a long ways between places. So growing up, I would drive 4 or 5 hours with my family for a weekend trip. And that would be totally normal to like go 4 or 5 hours for a weekend. That was totally fine. In the Netherlands, even driving an hour or two for a weekend trip would be seen as like a very far distance and kind of crazy to go that far for such a short time. So like the fact that their country is so much smaller does just like change their perspective on things like that. I do think that there is a real like focus on like tolerance and acceptance through Dutch culture and Dutch history, which is actually similar to Canadian culture and like from kind of slightly different places. But the Netherlands has had a history of being very like tolerant, legally and things like that, and tolerant through like drugs and LGBTQ rights and yeah, different historical perspectives. And Canada is like known to be very tolerant culturally and things like that. So I think we do share some of those things. And obviously in the Netherlands, they have a lot more bikes than in Canada. They have a lot more people cycling around there. That is definitely a difference as well.
Yeah, that's kind of a whole culture thing, isn't it? In the Netherlands, everyone has a bike.
Or multiple, I would say. Most people have multiple. They have their bad bike that just gets left at the office because it might get stolen. So they just use that. They have their nice bike that they use on the weekends. And then they have a bike that they just take to festivals. Like most people, it's a whole thing. And I felt like a true Dutch person once I had a bike in the Netherlands. You really feel like a new level of local once you actually have a bike there, I feel.
When I was in Germany, I lived in a city that was known to have a big biking community as well. And so
Cool.
the university that we were at, I mean, the parking, I mean, I don't know if it's called a parking lot or where people would park their bikes was just huge, like, and just jammed full of bikes all the time. Like it was insane. I've never seen that many bikes in my life, but what I found with the biking culture there, and I guess anywhere, it has specific rules to it. And I wasn't familiar with what you were supposed to do or weren't supposed to do. And I also had a bike for the month that I was there, but like I frequently found myself being on the wrong side of the road or the wrong lane, or like, I don't know, everything I was doing was wrong. And people would be like whatever the little bells, ding, 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 right behind me, you know, letting me know that I was in the wrong spot and stuff like that.
At least it was just the bell and not them yelling at you, because that is what I learned very quickly in the Netherlands, is the Dutch people will just yell at you as they go by. So at least it was just the bell in that case.
Yeah, I guess that's the better of the two.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying though. Like there is a comfortability with people in the Netherlands cycling, because like the same way we would in Canada skate from a very young age on ice, Dutch people learn how to bike even before they can walk, which sounds crazy, but they have little training bikes that don't have pedals on them and just get like walked by a 2-year-old. But I totally see with what you were saying in terms of like, because of that comfortability, people are just whipping around on bikes. And when you're biking in a bigger city like Amsterdam, it was overwhelming for sure at first and took some getting used to. And I wasn't used to the fact that where I was specifically, the cyclists were like the drivers of cars. In Canada, you really have to be careful when you're cycling around because people are not used to watching out for cyclists, and it's just way less common. Whereas in the Netherlands, they completely rule the road. So like you more so need to be careful as a pedestrian of cyclists hitting you and things like that, because they'll just run you over. Once you got into the groove though, I really liked it. And as someone who has like driven a car in lots of cities, it almost felt close to that, because the amount of cyclists that were around you when you were in a big city, it was just like, rush hour traffic, except everyone was on a bike. Like that is really what it felt like. And there still were things that were shocking. The fact that the bikes in the Netherlands were like minivans to lots of people. There would be a parent with like a kid on a trailing bike on the back, a kid on a seat on the handlebars, and then one other kid standing and holding onto the parent while she is in high heels with her briefcase all on one bike. Like it's just insane, but they're just so used to that. And things like kids cycling from such a young age. We would be in like downtown Amsterdam and there would be like a 4 or 5 year old just cycling on their own beside a parent, but no training wheels or anything, just in a big city, which was definitely shocking at first, but I got used to and like loved once I got used to it. So yeah, it's definitely ingrained in their culture the same way like skating would be in Canada.
I mean, it's nice to have a city that's so bikeable as well. I mean, not having to have a vehicle would be a real advantage. Can you do that like in the winter though? Can you ride a bike there in the winter?
It was such an advantage to not have to have a vehicle. I loved it. And you can, from my time living there, like there wasn't really intense snow in the Netherlands. It snowed a couple of times, but it didn't really stick around. So even in those cases, the Dutch people were out biking. And I've seen many videos on TikTok and things like that of like crazy storms, crazy weather, and the Dutch people are still out biking. So like they'll power through. They're committed. There's a famous Dutch phrase that says, "You're not made of sugar." So they go out in the rain because it rains a lot there. And they're like, yeah, you're not made of sugar. It's going to rain. You can just get on with life. So I feel like that is very quintessentially Dutch, to just get on with it. But it was different than cycling in other places. And I learned there that when they're designing roads and when they're designing city infrastructure, the cyclist safety and the cyclist priority is first in priority when they're doing those designs and when they're doing those plans, which is super cool. So like the roads and stuff are more designed for cyclists than cars, for example. And all that sort of like safety precaution, blind spots and right of way and safety stuff is like the cyclists are first, then pedestrians, then cars. Or it might be cars and then pedestrians, but cyclists are first, I know for sure. And that does make a difference. There's so much infrastructure, even biking from city to city, you're in a biking lane the entire time. And then in those cities, I often found that the cycling lanes on roads were just as big or bigger than the car lanes. Like there was just so much room and so much infrastructure that it was really like accommodating towards cyclists, which makes it just like so much more prevalent as well because people can actually get around, which is amazing.
I feel like biking between towns also sounds like a small country thing. Like if
It's insane. Yeah, it's insane. People thought I was crazy because I biked 45 minutes into work, and they thought that was a lot for a daily commute into work because there was a couple different cities and towns you could bike to within 45 minutes. That's how tight and close things are. So yeah, that was common, which is not so common in Canada for sure.
So could you see yourself living in the Netherlands again? Would you like to go back?
If you asked me today, right now, absolutely yes, I would say so for sure. I loved living there, and it definitely opened up my mind to just like more of the world and to more of myself and stuff. So I totally would love to go back because of the fact that it like opened up and really gave me such a bug for living new places. It made me realize there's a lot of other places I want to live as well. But when it comes to like looking at somewhere that I could see myself long term, it would be a dream country to end up in. I would say just the location in Europe makes it so easy to get around. I really found a comfortability once I got used to that Dutch directness and bluntness, a comfortability in like the Dutch culture and the Dutch bluntness. And I loved cycling around and that being so incorporated into my daily life. And I mean, I could go on and on. The cities are super cute and charming, and there's really great festivals in the Netherlands. Dutch people don't think that their food is very good, but I think there is some really good food and treats, specifically like sweet treats, like Dutch pancakes and stroopwafels and stuff. So there is like so much that I liked in the country as well.
What was your experience like when you went back to Canada? Did you have any like reverse culture shock?
Oof, definitely a few. I would say a big one was the amount of small talk and like that friendliness in Canada that is just so common. Like when you're just at the grocery store and stuff, I, even now having been back in Canada for a few months, don't even think twice about it. But coming back, that was very overwhelming just because it was way less common for people and strangers to strike up that kind of conversation when out and about in Amsterdam and out and about in the Netherlands. So, that was a bit overwhelming, but super nice and friendly, and I got back into the swing of it. Also, eavesdropping on people, as bad as that sound, but being able to like fully hear the conversations around me all the time after not being able to for so long, again, kind of overwhelming, but amazing, because then I was like, oh, there's drama going on, like you can hear everything. And I would say, like, again, we just talked about all the cycling stuff, but coming back to a place where like, because of how big Canada is, most cities in Canada have a driving culture. So coming back to that obviously is like is a bit of a shift and a culture shock, because everything is so spread out. And it definitely does get colder here. Now that I'm thinking about it, there were a lot of culture shocks coming back, but yeah, it definitely does get colder here too.
And was the small talk thing, you said that was overwhelming. Was it like the social obligation of needing to talk to people when you're just doing like your, like daily errands? Or what was the overwhelming part of it?
I think what you said exactly, like just the fact that you feel this pressure to come across more friendly, and that means just like having small talk in line and stuff like that. And just it is around you so much more. Like going to the grocery store, most likely there will be a sweet woman who starts a conversation with you or something like that. So it's just like more common and more prevalent. And yeah, I guess like overwhelming is maybe a bit of a dramatic word, but just like it was definitely a shift that kind of startled me at first. Whereas in the Netherlands, if I had to kind of train myself out of doing that to Dutch people because that would have come on really strong to them at first. So it more so was just I had to shift my mind back to that.
I mean, that's an interesting point, though, about people that come to visit Canada from countries that might be, a little bit more reserved in terms of small talk, is that it is a skill you kind of have to develop. And because, I'm from here, I always thought that was the easiest way. Like it's awkward just to stand across from a cashier and not say anything, right? Like it's actually less work for me just to be like, hey, how's it going? Nice weather today or whatever. But That's just because that's the culture I grew up in. If you weren't used to that, I think that could be hard. Or even for Canadians who are a little bit more reserved or introverted themselves, maybe that could be a challenge as well. Having that social obligation, but like having it, kind of generate like anxiety to have to do that. That's something that I didn't really think about until right now. That there's probably a lot of Canadians that struggle with that too.
No, I think that's such a good point and such an interesting point. And it comes from like a place where everyone is trying to be respectful on both sides. In Canada, our number one priority that we want to give off to people is we want to be friendly and welcoming and accommodating. And for us, like you said, we're so used to like filling that awkward silence, making those connections with strangers, even if that is just like talking about the weather or something super trivial. It like makes that connection and breaks the ice. And in the Netherlands, they're trying to be respectful too, but in a way that is not wasting your time. We're not beating around the bush. If they have a question for you, like, do you have this paperwork ready? We're not gonna like warm up with some questions. We're just gonna be like, okay, we both have a day to get on with. Do you have the paperwork? No. Okay. And move on. Which it just comes across so abrasive if you're not used to it. But in their way is their most kind way they could do it. So I think if you're coming from a culture like that, it maybe is gonna feel like almost like disingenuine, which is the last thing a Canadian would want. But I think it just comes off a little overbearing and a little bit like intense.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, you're so nice all the time. We get it. But it's like, it's weird to strangers. Like, just, that would be so weird to strangers in some places. You know what I mean? But it's to Canadians, that is so normal. When I arrive back to a Canadian airport, it really is like, oh, I'm back. You can hear it because there's just like everyone is chatting. And it's like, oh, dun, 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 dun. There's a certain like Canadian cadence, small talk cadence or whatever. Definitely.
And when you see outside of it, when you see like an alternative way of interacting with people, it does change your opinion of it, I think, a little bit. Like sometimes when I hear Canadians like talking at like a Starbucks line or whatever, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit where it's like, okay, guys, relax. Like you're just buying a coffee, chill. But that being said, like, Canadians are not even the most extreme in that regard. I think we see ourselves as being like that, but like, Latin culture does that a lot, if not more than we do. A lot of like pleasantries when you're interacting with someone. And when I was living in Colombia for a while, that's where my fiance is from. And I had some interactions. And I mean, it could be also the language barrier thing because I was doing this in Spanish and I often found like I found that I didn't have enough words to be as nice as people wanted me to be, where it's like, hey, how are you? Okay. How's it going? How's the family? How's this? How's that? And then you get into the thing. I'm like, I was just worried about having enough words to talk about the topic, the main topic that I just went right to that. But sometimes I would like text, like, for example, like an Airbnb owner or something, and I would like be texting them and I would show my fiance and be like, this is what I'm gonna say to them, and they'd be like, and then my fiance would be like, no, like she would take it and add like a paragraph before whatever I said just to be nice and be like, how are you, and adding some social pleasantries. And so I did see it from the other side for the first time where I was like, can we just talk about the business? I mean, like, we know why we're here, right? I have this question. They have an answer. Like, we can just do that. We don't have to do all this other stuff. And then it's like, oh yeah, this is how like Germans see Canadians, like it's like a sliding scale, right?
Totally. It's exactly a sliding scale. Like what you said, that's so hilarious. And it totally depends on like what your perspective is. For positive things and for negative things. If you're trying to come across nice, like you said, someone from a Latin culture is going to be like, no, we need to put more schmooze, more of this. And even for negative things too, in Canada, if we're trying to present something that is maybe like a negative critique or something, we're really going to beat around the bush and like try to coat that in the sandwich technique, positive, negative, positive. And in the Netherlands, they're just going to cut to the chase because that is like the best thing that they can do is not waste your time, say it how it is, and then everything's on the table. And I think it totally depends on like how you grew up, how you're going to respond to that. And I think it makes a really good point of like, this is why it's so cool to learn bits of language, even if it's little bits when you're going somewhere, because that informs so much about those places and about the people in those places. And it's not necessarily 100% across the board, but if someone's like native language is more direct or to the point, that's going to have like an effect, I think, just on how they communicate versus someone who speaks a romantic language or is from a Latin culture and, you know, uses language in that more expressive and more passionate way. That's going to come across. So it's kind of, yeah, bringing it back to that language thing for a second is so interesting.
Well, and if you're not like a super advanced speaker in another language, I think you do have to be more direct. Like there is a necessity just in terms of like vocabulary.
You're just trying to get the point across, and then your fiance is like, no, this sounds horribly rude. And you're like, okay, I'm just trying to get the point across. Yeah, totally.
And, you know, I see that here in Canada as well with people that maybe don't speak English super well. Sometimes I watch them like they're on the bus and they want to get out and the door isn't opening. And they're just like, door. And I'm like, yo, like, be like, you got to be more chill, but like maybe they don't speak English super well, you know? And so like, they're just like, this is my immediate need and this is what I'm trying to do. And so I'm just going to express that the way that I know how. And that doesn't mean that they're a more direct person. It just might mean that they don't have all of the fluff words to be like, excuse me, would you mind opening the back door for me? You know, like that requires a lot of vocabulary. So yeah, I think it generates like empathy all around learning languages, you know, from empathy in terms of like understanding how you communicate with other people, but then also understanding how other people do and the challenges they might be going through. And yeah.
I think that is such a good point. Something everyone can keep in mind. Because it is like putting yourself into that perspective. If you only had a few words, you're going to try to do everything you can like around the language to give off the vibe that you want to give off. But sometimes you are super limited by that. And yeah, that is definitely something I've like learned being in that position myself in other countries or traveling in general. Just like being in those shoes, you can realize so quickly how hard it is to communicate, and it gives you a lot of empathy for that.
Absolutely. Jonny, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been really fun.
This has been amazing. This is actually my very first time ever on a podcast and has been amazing. So thank you so much for chatting. It's been so lovely.
No, you're super easy to talk to. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours, but we should probably wrap it up. Before we do though, let people know how they can find your content online.
Absolutely. I am on YouTube at Jonny Arnott, JonnyArnott. And then I also am on Instagram at Jonny.Arnott and on TikTok at Jonny Arnott. And I have videos coming out every week about some of the backpacking this past year I was talking about. And I actually have some more videos upcoming this fall, specifically about Canada and some hidden gems off the beaten trail places in Canada specifically, which I'm really excited about. So any of those places, I will be there all the time.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll put links in the description to all of your social medias and people can check it out that way. Okay, thank you so much.